Everything has to be paid for. The Korean War ended in 1953. No peace treaty was ever signed. Today, 72 years later, South Korea and North Korea maintain a combined military force of approximately 1.5 million active-duty personnel along the 38th parallel. South Korea alone spends between $28 billion and $30 billion annually on defense, a significant portion of which is directed at a threat that has not fired a shot in over 7 decades. This is not a war. It is not peace. It is a permanent state of armed readiness with a permanent price tag, and it is far from unique. Across the globe, frozen conflicts, territorial disputes locked in neither resolution nor active combat, generate military expenditures that rival those of active wars. This episode examines the economics of conflicts that never end, never resolve, and never stop costing. Not victory, not peace, maintenance. What a frozen conflict actually is. A frozen conflict is a territorial dispute in which active hostilities have ceased but no formal resolution, treaty, withdrawal, or recognized settlement has been reached. The territory remains contested. Both sides maintain military postures along the fault line. Neither side can afford to stand down because standing down means conceding the dispute. The result is a permanent state of mobilization with no endpoint. The IISS, International Institute for Strategic Studies, identifies at least a dozen active frozen or near-frozen conflicts globally, including the Korean Peninsula, Taiwan Strait, Kashmir, Transnistria, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Northern Cyprus, and Nagorno-Karabakh. Each of these conflicts ties down military resources, distorts national budgets, and prevents economic activity in the contested zones indefinitely. The critical economic insight is this: frozen conflicts do not reduce military costs to zero. They reduce them to a maintenance level that, over decades, accumulates to a figure comparable to, and in some cases exceeding, the cost of the original conflict itself. The Korean Peninsula, the most expensive standoff on Earth. The Korean Peninsula is the largest and most costly frozen conflict in the world. South Korea's annual defense budget of approximately $28 billion to $30 billion positions it as the world's 9th largest military spender, according to SIPRI data. A substantial share of this expenditure, estimated by RAND Corporation analysts at 40% to 50%, is directly attributable to the North Korean threat. That translates to $11 billion to $15 billion per year spent on a threat that has existed continuously since 1953. Over 70 years, the cumulative cost of maintaining readiness against North Korea exceeds $700 billion in inflation-adjusted terms. This figure does not include the indirect costs, the opportunity cost of military conscription, which removes young men from the workforce for 18 to 21 months, the foregone investment in civilian infrastructure that defense budgets crowd out, or the dampening effect on foreign investment created by the persistent risk of escalation. The United States maintains approximately 28,500 troops in South Korea, a permanent garrison with an annual cost estimated by the Congressional Budget Office at $2.5 billion to $3.5 billion per year. This commitment has persisted without interruption for over 7 decades. They said the Korean War armistice would be a temporary arrangement until a permanent peace could be negotiated. They got 72 years of continuous military standoff, cumulative defense expenditures exceeding $700 billion on the South Korean side alone, and no peace treaty in sight. The Taiwan Strait, escalation without contact. The Taiwan situation operates on a different but economically parallel logic. No shots have been fired across the Taiwan Strait in decades, but both China and Taiwan maintain military postures calibrated to the possibility of conflict, and the economic cost of this readiness is enormous on both sides. Taiwan's annual defense budget runs approximately $13 billion to $14 billion, according to Taiwanese government figures and SIPRI tracking. China's military expenditure in forces and capabilities specifically oriented toward Taiwan scenarios is difficult to isolate precisely, But IISS analysts estimate that Taiwan contingency planning accounts for a significant share of China's overall $225 billion defense budget. The indirect economic cost is arguably larger than the direct military expenditure. The Taiwan Strait is one of the world's most critical shipping choke points. Approximately 1.1 trillion in goods passes through it annually, according to data from the Brookings Institution. The persistent risk of conflict in the strait is factored into global supply chain planning, insurance pricing, and investment decisions. Every company that maintains a backup supply chain outside Taiwan, a practice that has accelerated significantly since 2020, is paying a premium for risk that a frozen conflict created. They said the Taiwan situation would remain stable through mutual deterrence at manageable cost. They got a military spending spiral on both sides, global supply chain restructuring worth hundreds of billions, and an insurance and investment premium that no single budget line captures. Kashmir and Cyprus. The smaller bills that add up. Kashmir and northern Cyprus illustrate how frozen conflicts function as permanent fiscal drains at smaller scale, but with the same structural logic. India and Pakistan each maintain substantial military forces along the line of control in Kashmir. India's overall defense budget exceeds $72 billion annually, with Kashmir-related expenditures estimated by defense analysts at 10% to 15% of total spending, roughly $7 billion to $11 billion per year. Pakistan's defense budget of approximately $8 billion to $9 billion is similarly skewed toward the Kashmir front. Northern Cyprus has been divided since 1974. Turkey maintains approximately 30,000 to 40,000 troops on the island, a garrison that costs an estimated $500 million to $1 billion annually. The divided island's economy operates at roughly 60% to 70% of what unified economic integration would produce, according to World Bank assessments. The frozen conflict does not prevent economic activity, it reduces it permanently, structurally, and invisibly. The opportunity cost calculation. The most damaging economic effect of frozen conflicts is not what they cost directly, it is what they prevent. Military conscription in frozen conflict countries removes productive age workers from the economy for extended periods. In South Korea, mandatory military service runs 18 to 21 months. In Israel, which faces a different but structurally similar security environment, conscription runs 24 to 32 months. The IMF has estimated that mandatory conscription in security-intensive states reduces GDP growth by 0.3 to 0.5 percentage points annually through workforce reduction alone. Foreign direct investment is suppressed by the persistent risk of escalation. The World Bank's business environment assessments consistently rank frozen conflict zones among the lowest globally for investment climate, not because of current instability, but because of the probability of future instability. Investors price in the risk. Capital flows elsewhere. Development aid that might otherwise fund infrastructure, education, or health is redirected toward military and security budgets. In both North and South Korea, defense spending consumes a share of GDP that, if redirected to civilian investment, would generate measurable GDP growth within a decade. They said, frozen conflicts impose only marginal economic costs compared to active warfare. They got cumulative expenditures measured in hundreds of billions, workforce distortions that suppress GDP growth by measurable percentage points annually, and investment climates that deter capital indefinitely. Why they persist: the political economy of stalemate. Frozen conflicts persist not because resolution is impossible, but because resolution is politically costly for the parties involved, and the economic cost of maintaining the status quo is distributed in ways that make it tolerable to decision-makers. Military establishments in frozen conflict states have institutional interests in continued readiness. Defense budgets, career progression, and institutional prestige all depend on the threat remaining active. Politicians in both claiming states face domestic constituencies that view any concession on territorial disputes as betrayal. The political cost of resolving a frozen conflict, even at significant economic benefit, often exceeds the political cost of maintaining it indefinitely. The RAND Corporation has modeled this dynamic extensively. Their analysis of frozen conflict resolution scenarios shows that in most cases, the economic benefit of resolution exceeds the costs within 5 to 10 years. A unified Korean peninsula, for instance, would generate estimated GDP gains of $170 billion to $400 billion over 2 decades through trade integration, reduced military spending, and increased foreign investment, according to various estimates from the World Bank and Korean economic institutes. Yet the political barriers to resolution remain insurmountable under current leadership structures on both sides. This is the perverse incentive at the heart of frozen conflict economics. The people who bear the cost, taxpayers, conscripts, investors, are not the people who make the decision to continue. The people who make the decision, political and military leaders, bear costs measured in votes and prestige, not dollars. The system is self-sustaining precisely because it distributes costs and decision-making authority to different populations. The long account. A frozen conflict is not a war that ended. It is a war that paused and then became a permanent budget item. The Korean Peninsula alone has consumed over $700 billion in South Korean defense spending since 1953. Add the American garrison costs, North Korean military expenditure, and the opportunity costs of conscription and foregone investment, and the total economic burden of a single frozen conflict exceeds $1 trillion over 7 decades, and it is still accumulating every year, without resolution, without a peace treaty, without an endpoint. Across all major frozen conflicts globally, Korea, Taiwan, Kashmir, Cyprus, Transnistria, and others, the combined annual military expenditure attributable to unresolved disputes runs between $80 billion and $120 billion, according to aggregated SIPRI and IISS data. This is not war spending. It is maintenance spending. It is the cost of keeping armies on high alert for threats that may never materialize, but that no side can afford to ignore. The frozen conflict is the war industry's most efficient product. It requires no active combat to sustain demand. It generates no resolution to terminate the spending cycle. It persists across political administrations, across generations, and across decades, consuming budgets, distorting economies, and preventing the productive investment that peace would make possible. Not victory, not peace, maintenance. And maintenance, it turns out, costs almost as much as the war itself. Subscribe to the price of conflict, because the most expensive conflicts are not always the ones you can see on a map.